Wake Up with Jim and Sab is exclusively on Spotify.
And if you want to start your own podcast, you can check out anchor.fm.
If you love the pod and you want to support us, make sure you follow us on Spotify. Also, you can tag us on Instagram and Twitter at Wake Up with Jim and Sab.
Welcome to the Wake Up with Zap podcast. Yari.
Oo nga pala.
Iniwan ako sa ere.
Welcome to the Wake Up with Jim and Sab podcast!
Sabaw. So in this episode, it's going to be different. Jim is sitting this one out. I'm going to miss you. But I will say I had the time of my life. I was so lucky to be given the opportunity to interview one of the greatest young adult fiction authors of our time, John Green. So he's the author of The Fault in Our Stars, Looking for Alaska, Turtles All the Way Down. A lot of our favorite young
I
adult
remember
books.
when we were dating sa umpisa pa lang,
Ano?
you were telling me.
About John Green.
Yeah,
Yes.
how much you loved him.
Yeah, I know. So, yun, sobrang kinilig ako and it was such a great conversation. I learned so much from it and I hope you guys will do that as well. Enjoy the episode. Thanks, Fully Booked. And hi, John. I
Hi,
cannot.
Saab. Nice to speak with you.
I know. I can't believe I'm talking to you right now. I'm going to try my best not to fangirl because it's not about me. It's about you, John. And that's why let's get on with the questions. And my first one is, how are you doing? It's a crazy time right now. Where are you calling us from and what's the situation there?
Yeah, so first off, thank you. It's so nice to be able to speak with you. It's so nice to be able to do an event with Fully Booked, which has been so supportive of my work over the years. And I'm just really, really grateful for this opportunity. I am in my basement in my house in Indianapolis, in the center of the United States. And, this has been a really difficult time, I think, around the world. And not a lot of places have fared worse than the United States, I'm afraid. And so it's been very difficult. You know, our daughter had COVID, which was really scary. And fortunately, nobody else in the family has had it. We're doing okay. The rise of the new Delta variant is very difficult here. But, you know, we're fortunate to be in a situation where there's vaccines available and we need the whole world to be in that situation as quickly as possible. So, I've just been trying to focus on my work because I find focusing on anything else really stressful and really overwhelming.
I get that. And I guess that's why we're doing a virtual book tour right now to keep everyone safe. And is
Yeah.
this your first virtual book tour?
It is. This is the first time I've been home in the months after a book came out ever, and there's a lot that I like about it. Like I love being able to talk with readers in the Philippines or talk with readers around the world, which is much harder to do when you're having to get on airplanes and everything. But I miss being with people in real life. I mean, especially related to writing and books, but just in general, I miss the real world, the world outside these walls.
I know, and I'm sure the fans miss the opportunity to watch you like sign their books for them and everything like that, which, by the way, I have a signed copy
Oh, good.
right now. I'm gonna show it off. To
yeah.
our viewers, please don't hate me. I'm not the only one with a signed copy. We're gonna show you more on that later. But speaking of the Anthropocene Reviewed, this initially began as a podcast, and I love that podcast, by the way. Podcasters unite. My question is, how different is it writing for a podcast, which is meant to be listened to, as opposed to writing for something that's meant to be read or visually as text?
When I was starting out, when I was starting out writing the podcast, I didn't think it was that different. And I felt like, in my writing, I try to kind of capture the cadences of speech, or at least some of them. But what I realized over the course of writing this is that actually, when you're writing, you're never really capturing the cadences of speech, because you're writing you're writing to be read, and that means people turning these scratches on a page into ideas inside their heads. And that's very different from listening to something. But I think they both have tremendous value. And for me, like, they're both beautiful ways of exploring the world and of ingesting and creating art. But I needed to, when I was turning it into a book, I realized how much I needed to change just because it sounds different to listen to something than it does to read something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. But I do agree that when I read it, I feel like you are talking to me, and I do somehow I do hear that cadence in your voice. But maybe that's just me, or
No, I think that's one of the big tricks of writing is, and that's something that I have really spent the last 20 years since I was a kid, really trying to figure out how to, how to do that in writing, how to have a voice to it, a kind of consistent energy to it. And when I'm writing novels, the voice I'm trying to find is not mine. And so this was a very different and weird and kind of lovely experience for me, because really for the first time I was trying to find my voice, and I was trying to figure out, well, what do I sound like, or what do I want to sound like in telling these stories.
that's amazing because I'm actually a creative writing major, and I do a lot of I used to write a lot of nonfiction. You know how writers, the quote unquote writers, don't ever really write. I mean, writers
Yeah.
like and I know I feel like I you speak so much to me about that when you find your voice, and as opposed to when you're writing fiction, and it's just really a different world. And this is your first nonfiction book, and you do write about how writing fiction has become exhausting to you, and how you say that fiction is written in code and that you're the only one who knows the code. And I want to know, what was your turning point that convinced you that you no longer wanted to write in code? Is it true you no longer want to write fiction, or
I don't know. I know I do. I would like to write fiction again, someday. But I felt like, when I was finishing my last novel, Turtles All the Way Down, when I was finishing writing it, I knew that something was changing for me. It felt much more like a goodbye to a certain kind of writing than I had expected it to feel. And it also just felt more like a goodbye to a certain kind of writing. Um, that it was unexpected for me. It was, but that's how it felt. That book ends with a time jump. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the reader and the characters sort of jump ahead in time. And I realized as I was writing that I was also jumping ahead in time. I was also jumping to a different kind of writing. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I really, when I finished that book, I kind of felt like, I don't know, I guess I had kind of a midlife crisis. I was like, I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I'd only ever had one dream, I'd only ever had one dream job.
Mhm.
And I just kind of realized that it wasn't as fulfilling for me as it had been for a variety of reasons. And so I needed to find a new way to try to write. And for me, that was nonfiction.
And I mean, I don't know if I'm labeling this for you, but I think it really is amazing creative nonfiction, because the way that you wrote about your own childhood, like inserting that into stuff that it's not exactly a memoir, but it has a lot of your past in it. And for those who haven't read the book, it is about reviewing just random stuff about the world. And when you were reviewing these things, I want to know what factors came to play when you were doing your review rating, and also how you picked your topics, because they just jump from one thing to another.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that it's not a memoir, but it is a memoir, and every review is a memoir. When you review a book on Goodreads, it's a memoir because you're writing about your experience of reading this book in this time. And that may be very different from if you were to review the book at a different time in your life, or revisit it later. And so I was thinking about that. And then I was also thinking about the fact that I knew I was going to have to write about myself for this to work. and to write about my own experiences. And so when picking the topics, I tried to find places where my very small life runs into these really big forces, whether that's capitalism or climate change
Or a
or
comment.
right, yeah, or a comet, or right, like astronomy. And so I wanted to write about places where I felt like my life is bumping up against these big historical forces and these things that are much larger than myself. And then, like a year into the project, this other force showed up, of this infectious disease pandemic, and that I of course had no idea that that was going to happen, but it really reshaped the project.
And I'm sure, I mean, you have been very vocal about your mental health and you were very vulnerable in the book. Um, would you be open to explaining like how it affected you mentally as you were writing the book because you were in the process of making it during this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had, well, ever since I was a child, I've had mental health challenges. I have OCD, and I've had episodes of depression in the past, and periods of severe anxiety. And I wanted to write about that openly, partly because I wrote a book about a kid with OCD, and a lot of people kind of read that as a memoir, as like being as about me, which it isn't. I mean, I know what it's like to have OCD. I don't know what it's like to be that particular kid with OCD. Like, that's the magic of a novel, is that you're imagining something. And so I wanted to write about my personal experience in a more direct way. But also, it's hard for me to write about myself and the world around me without acknowledging those things, because mental illness has been a big part of my life. I expect it to be a big part of my life moving forward, but it also doesn't define me. It's not the main thing that I am. Like, if you ask me to think about myself and whether I have a full life, I do have a full life. There are periods when it's not, when I'm not well, like there are for a lot of people, but I still have a really full, wonderful life. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to tell those stories, is because I think that's many people's truths, and it can be true for the vast majority of us. Mental illness is treatable. It doesn't have to be, in most cases, and in most cases it doesn't have to be a life defining experience. So yeah, I wanted to write about it openly, and as honestly as I could. But then, like, when the pandemic came, I mean, the pandemic was definitely not or is not great for my particular obsessive compulsive disorder. So that part has been very, very tough, and like, it's been hard. And I think it's important to just acknowledge that it's been hard. But it's been a really challenging period for me. But also I can get through it. I can survive this and go on to the next thing.
Yes, I mean, hello, it's here. You did it. And I mean, I do want to thank you. I want to commend you for that, for being so open about it. You have a lot of young adults as your readers, and I think it's another pandemic, I think.
Yeah,
Mental
that's
health.
so true, Saab. That's so true.
And I feel like the more we talk about it, the more we will address it and maybe try to find a solution for these things. So thank you for that. But yeah, speaking of the Anthropocene Reviewed, I do want to say that there is a lot of nostalgia around it. And I wanted to ask, is it something that was a deliberate theme? Because you did look back at your past and even humanity's history. So was that deliberate, or is it just something that came naturally to you? Did you have like an outline of like, I want it to be this, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was thinking, when my publisher and I were thinking about the journey of the book, because like you said, the topics are very random, but hopefully as you read it, you are on a little bit of a journey from, hope to despair and then back to hope. And then also this journey this very personal journey from childhood and watching Halley's Comet with my father and, being with my mom as she took care of me while I was being bullied, into adulthood, becoming a father myself, learning from and with my kids. And, I definitely wanted, like, when we look back at the past, this is something I wanted to write about because it fascinates me. When we look back at the past, we often do so nostalgically. Like, we often look back at it and we think like, oh, those were the good old days. And in fact, I was talking about this with my wife last night because we were remembering the first 6 months or so that we were friends before we started dating. And we were both sort of nostalgically remembering this time. And then I was like, but you do remember that we were miserable, right? Like, it wasn't fun to be 24. It was very stressful. I didn't know, we didn't know what we were going to do. Like all of our relationships were in constant turmoil. But I still have fond memories of that time. And so in writing about that past, I wanted to be nostalgic, but also like acknowledge that where that comes from and where that urge comes from, and write about how, like, I know I'm romanticizing this, because for me, those things have to both be true. That, like, both I can look back on my past and it feels survivable because I survived it in a way that it couldn't feel when I was inside of it. But at the same time, like, I need to look back at my past with some level of honesty and also realize that there were really, really hard times.
I think it's amazing that you just mentioned that, because I was thinking, as I was listening to the podcast and reading the book, you talk about romanticizing the past. And I think that's been done for a lot of history, especially in the United States. And I feel like you called out a lot of it, the romanticizing of things. And then you just called it out, like, really just, you just called it out. And I thought that was pretty cool of you, of actually sticking to the facts and just calling a spade. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I think that's what you were saying about your own life, about how you can romanticize things, but you also want to look at it as objectively as you can. And that's super duper cool.
Yeah. And really, like, engaging with history, I mean, it can't mean, it can't mean lying. Like, I understand the urge to want to be able to tell a story about my community that portrays us as heroic, or that allows us to be patriotic, or whatever. But at the same time, we have to grapple openly and honestly with the truth of our history. And in the case of the United States, that's a very complicated history that often gets sanitized in ways that, aren't just harmful historically. Like, they perpetuate and deepen current injustices, current current harm. And I think that's something I definitely wanted to write about. Like, and that's true for human history as well. Like the whole history of our species is complicated. And if we don't make room for both things to be true, that humans are both a wonderful, astonishing, contribution to life on Earth. We make art, we sing songs, we, care for each other. We are incredible, and we are terrible. Both of these things have to be true at the same time. Yeah, like, we are capable of awfulness, a horrible, horrible awfulness to each other. And, like, we have to let both those things be true.
And that's why I like how you rate things. It's just very honest, and it's not like, just all blind hope and it's all 5 stars for the human experience. It's just, I don't know, it's just very real. But yeah, speaking of the history side of the book, I mean, I felt like I learned so much more than my history classes. And I wanted to know how much research went into each essay.
Lots, tons, so much. But that's also what I love about this. One of the things I love most about writing is getting lost in research, reading books, reading books. I was reviewing this bird species. I'm not sure if y'all have this, Canada geese, but this very, like, one of the most common, it's like the pigeon of America. And but the only books written about Canada geese are like 70 years old. So it was so fun to read these 70-year-old books and to get lost in a world of research and in trying to make connections, trying to understand the history of cave paintings, or the history of the board game Monopoly, or the history of the video game Tetris. Like wanting to have a deeper understanding of these things is a lot of what drives me in the first place. Like not just when I'm writing, like in general. Like I think that's a big part of why we started Crash Course, was because I wanted to. I had a similar experience in school where a lot of times I felt like school wasn't. It was just like something I had to do. It was like something I had to escape, like had to make it through so that I could become a grown-up. And I didn't understand at the time how wonderful learning is, how like central to the human experience learning is, and how joyful it can be, because it felt very, it felt like I was being asked to do a bunch of things that I didn't know why I was being asked to do. And I didn't know what I was going to like do with them when I grew up, and, all that stuff. But I love learning, and I just didn't realize that I loved learning until I was an adult.
I agree. I feel like, especially back in the day, I remember it was mostly about memorization so that you could take a test. And that's not really what learning is, right? I mean, it's different when you make it interesting. And that's what you do with Crash Course.
Yeah, we're very focused on kind of inquiry-based learning, like learning through being curious. So you start out curious about a question, which is one of the human superpowers. I think we are a very curious species. And then you try to look for answers to it, and you build connections. And that was the most fun part of writing this book, was the unexpected connections. Like even when I was writing about something extremely sad, like the Black Death, one of the worst things to happen in human history, this outbreak of bubonic plague in Asia and Europe and North Africa in the 13th century. And it was a very sad, it was rough to read about all that stuff and to read about such human suffering. But the connections that you find between then and now, between the ways that people responded to an infectious disease pandemic 700 years ago and the way that people are responding to it now, like that fascinates me.
Jim, I'm going to give you 5 random objects, and you have to tell me what you think of them and how many stars you would give each object.
What's the rating system?
5 stars. 1 to 5 stars.
Okay.
Okay? Ready?
Okay.
Fast lang, ah.
Okay.
Pencils.
5.
Hard drives.
5.
Essential oils.
5.
Ramen.
2.
Frozen vegetables.
10.
Thanks to Fully Booked, we're giving away 2 copies of the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green to 2 lucky pod kids. Make a review of the most mundane object in your house and really sell it to us as if you're doing an elevator pitch. Post a photo of the object with your review in your IG stories and tag at Wake Up with Jim and Saab. The most creative and funny review wins a copy. Yeah. So actually, when I was listening to your podcast, you also had one about the Blue Death.
And cholera.
Yeah, and you published that in 2018, not knowing that this was coming. And I mean, just the parallelism of just not knowing what's happening, and it was just, I mean, I don't know, how do you select your topics, because they seem so relevant?
Yeah.
Did you just, with your brother, did you like have a whiteboard and then just write down like all the things you wanted to learn about, all the things you were curious about?
It definitely begins for me from a place of my own personal curiosity. Like with disease especially, I'm really interested in it partly because I've had several illnesses that changed the course of my life, but also because it's something we don't talk about very much. It's almost sidelined in history, even though it's one of the most important historical forces. Like cholera is a hugely important force in the story of human history. The same is true of tuberculosis. The same is true now of COVID-19. And yet, like when we talk about history, we talk about generals and wars and politicians and revolutions, and those are very important. But really like some of the biggest drivers of change in human life are diseases, they're illnesses, and it's a huge part of living in the world with a body. And so, yeah, I've always been interested in it, and I've always been terrified of disease pandemic because from reading history, I knew how terrifying it is, how difficult it is to live through a pandemic, how people really struggle to like during cholera. It's a great example. Like during the Blue Death, people were rioting because they thought that they couldn't trust the medical professionals. They thought that medical professionals were stealing bodies for research or causing cholera so that more people would die. And the way that in the face of these pandemics, like we lose trust in expertise, we lose trust in the people in power. Like seeing that all play out in my world is surreal and distressing and scary.
Yeah, and I'm sure, especially now that you are a father, I mean, how much of that has changed. I mean, in your life and also as a writer, like has that changed? Because I know, when rock stars write their songs and they can just be all about their whatever they want to talk about, and then when they become a father or a mother and they just kind of want to mellow out.
Yeah.
Same when you're a writer.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that I mean, being a parent has changed my work so much. Like, I don't think I could have written The Fault in Our Stars if I hadn't been a father, because it changed the way I understand love. I mean, when Henry was born, I knew immediately, in a way that I had never understood before, that love is stronger than death in at least one way, which is that after I die, I will still be Henry's dad, and as long as either of us is here, that love is here. And so I think when I look at my books, I see the ways that being a dad has really changed my work really dramatically. And then in writing Turtles All the Way Down, I was thinking a lot about my daughter and the challenges and opportunities that she has. And then in writing this book, my kids, they're at the margins of it, because I don't like to talk about my kids too much in public. Like, their lives are theirs, and I don't want to be using them. But so I did like read the parts that they're in. I read to them and I was like, are you good with this? Like, is it weird? Do you want me? And they were fine with it. And I try to only talk about the kids in ways that I could be talking about almost any kid, so there's nothing really super specific to them. But that said, like, they affected the book so much because I learned so much from being a father. And I think that's true for most parents. Like, I learned so much from them about paying attention, about, being in the moment, about loving and being loved, about vulnerability. I mean, it's really, really hard to make yourself vulnerable to the reality of experience, because it feels, you don't want to feel too much too directly. You want to protect yourself. You don't want to like crack open in front of people. And one of the things that I have had to learn in my life is that I have to be vulnerable. Like, it's an unfortunate reality. I have to be vulnerable if I want to be able to love and be loved in the ways that I want. And so, yeah, my kids have taught me all that.
And I think you also have to be vulnerable if you want to keep writing, because
Yes.
I have read, I mean, and I also kind of believe, but now you have broken that belief. But I used to believe that you write better when you're going through something, or you're struggling, or if you're unhappy. And then if you become happy, there's just like not much to write about, because it's like you're just
Right.
But then I think it's different when you love something or someone, or it's not true that you can't write when you're happy, but it will be better if you allow yourself to be more vulnerable. Is that true?
I think that's exactly it. So I think like we've sort of long embraced this idea that you have to be miserable to write, or you have to be, you know, crazy or an alcoholic, or have some terrible challenge in your life to write. And I have lots. I maybe I further that stereotype by having mental health problems. But for the record, like, I have lots of writer friends, many of whom are much better than I am, who are perfectly sane, and who are very happy, well-adjusted people. But I think that is exactly right. And I'd never actually thought of it that way. But that like we've embraced that idea. But the true idea is actually that you have to allow yourself, you have to make yourself vulnerable. And that means making yourself vulnerable to joy, which a lot of people don't want to do because it seems like cringy or embarrassing. But it also means making yourself vulnerable to pain, making yourself vulnerable to, other people's suffering, and also like finding a way to acknowledge and let out your own fears, your own worries. And that's hard.
Yeah. But speaking of family, I know that you and your brother Hank are really, really close. And I wonder, how is it working and writing with your brother?
It's great. I didn't actually know my brother that well when we were kids, because I went away to boarding school when he was 11. So I never really knew him as a teenager. I liked him, but he was sort of like just like the other guy who lived in my house. We weren't super close. And it really was, and I always admired Hank, and I still do very, very much. But I just we just weren't that tight until we started making videos together, and then working on Crash Course together, and now working on a huge variety of things together. And it's the great joy of my life, of my professional life anyway, to be able to work with Hank all the time. I just have such admiration for him. He's so committed to trying to make the world better. He's so committed to the missions of our company, and I think the world of him. And it's never been hard to like write together or work together or any of that stuff, because we just have a deep level of trust. So I mean, we fight like sometimes, like most siblings, but not really that often. We just kind of, I think our values line up pretty well, and we just kind of enjoy working together.
Yeah, I think the key is also not just trust, but also a lot of respect for each other.
Yeah. I mean, that's very true. And I think in any creative partnership, there has to be a mutual respect, where you really do, and mutual generosity too, where you try to make space for the person creatively, even if their vision is a little different from yours, making space so that they can have their vision and you can also have yours that's the key. And that can be a very delicate balance. But honestly, I think it's much harder for Hank to work with me than it is for me to work with Hank. Like, I think that I'm the difficult one.
I feel the same way because I'm in a podcast with my husband, and I feel like,
oh yeah,
that's very complicated. But there is a lot of respect, and that's why it's still ongoing.
You really need that mutual respect. But yeah, it's good to know if you're the difficult person, right? Like, it makes you less the difficult person if you at least are aware that you're the difficult person. And I am definitely the difficult person.
I'm gonna say I'm the difficult one too. Okay, I'm gonna.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah. So as you know, you have a very large fan base here in the Philippines, and like I said, I am one of the many teenagers. Well, I'm not a teenager now, but back then. But right now, there are still teenagers who read your young adult novels. And I just wanted to know, what would you say to them, because they are anticipating your first nonfiction book, and what should they expect, or how do you, I don't know, some people have a hard time when they're so in love with a certain author and they're used to it a certain way, and then it's different. It's just like listening to albums of your favorite artist, and then they change. It's the Sergeant Pepper's
right
album. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very different book, and I wanted to write something that was very different, but at the same time, I wanted to bring a lot of, hopefully, I don't really know. I mean, I don't have enough self-awareness really to know what people like about my books, so it's a little hard for me to answer the question. But I think what I wanted to do is I wanted to do something different, um, a different kind of writing, obviously a very different format, but that had the same heart in it, that
Mhm.
still had some heart, and was still trying to, I really am interested in emotion, and finding ways to break down the irony and cynicism that we all have, that we all need, especially in the 21st century, to protect ourselves from, all the, we need some irony. It's a
Mhm.
way of protecting ourselves from being hurt, and I think that's a very healthy thing. But I also think there are times when we need to lay down that irony and just reckon honestly with beauty, with pain, with love. And I try to do that in my novels, and I also wanted to do that in the Anthropocene Reviewed.
Wow, that was beautiful, I would say. Um, but how do you encourage these people who kind of are used to fiction to embrace nonfiction, especially um, a lot of young girls like myself. I am a blogger on all different platforms, and it's getting harder and harder for me now that it is. You wrote about it, googling strangers, and I feel like I do want to put less of myself
Yeah.
online. And when I'm trying to write, I feel like I'm so self conscious that this is going to be published, even if it's just going to be a journal on my notebook. I feel like, oh my gosh, maybe my kids will read this one day, and I always censor myself, and I always feel like I have to edit. How do you encourage them to feel safe when they're writing in their own journals?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like there's somebody on your shoulder, right? Like watching you when you work, and that they're judging you. I think a lot of times, for me anyway, like I feel their judgment, or I feel like it's yeah. So I one of the things I loved about writing, one of the reasons I wrote fiction when I
Mm,
was younger, was because that's when I didn't feel the somebody looking over my shoulder and reading it while I was working, or like judging me while I was writing it. And I did always feel that when I wrote nonfiction, because like the only really nonfiction I'd written was like papers in school,
mm,
and there is somebody reading it and judging you, like your teacher. So I think, like, for me, writing fiction was a way of escaping that feeling. But then I started to feel it. Like, I started, especially after The Fault in Our Stars was published, and there was just a lot of attention and pressure on my work, which was lovely. It was great to have the book reach so many readers, and it was just, an incredible, weird experience. But I started to feel that person looking over my shoulder, judging me as I was writing. I couldn't like get out of my own head enough to like just try to tell the story that I wanted to tell. I couldn't like get lost in the story, because that's the other thing I love about writing, is that feeling of getting lost and not being stuck inside of myself, not being stuck inside of my mind, frankly. And I stopped being able to feel that, because I felt constantly self-conscious even as I was typing, which is I think similar to what you're describing.
mm,
And I don't have a good way of getting out of that necessarily, except to continue to try, because your story matters, and your way of looking at the world matters, and it's particular to you. And sharing that contributes, even if you don't share it very widely, or even if you don't share it with anyone at all, I still think it contributes to the overall like body of 7 billion humans together trying to figure out what it means to be human. And I think that's a really lovely and important exercise. And so, yeah, I don't know, I also honestly, like, I also when I'm writing in journals, I also censor myself because I think to myself, man, I don't really want my kids to read this. Like, if I die, like if I die suddenly and like my kids are reading this and they're like, oh, well, I don't like hearing that. Yeah, so I don't know. I censor myself too.
Yeah, I guess you don't have to write down everything.
Right. Yeah.
But
Especially like on days when things are really frustrating with the kids,
yeah.
like I don't want to write that down. Like I don't I don't want them to one day be like, "Oh man, dad was really annoyed that day."
Yeah, but with what you were saying, actually, that is true when you write about things, because like what I said about you earlier, talking about and speaking up about mental health and how that affects other people, that really does something to the world. And with regards to when you said that you didn't know how what people liked about your books before and even now, I would say my personal review of your books is that it's very relatable to me. And even with the nonfiction one, I feel this relatability to it, and that's why I really really enjoy it, because I feel like I'm not alone, and that's very very powerful.
Yeah, and I think you have to, you know, yes, I understand feeling the like somebody looking over your shoulder, feeling judged, feeling worried about sharing something. I still feel really worried about sharing stuff. Like when I send a first draft to my editor, it's just like I'm 14 again, and I'm telling my friends like it's just a first draft. This isn't very good. Like, but I'm secretly kind of like hoping that it is good. And I understand that, and I still feel it. But I also think like we have to find ways to make ourselves vulnerable and to be open to each other, to be open to those we care about.
Mm.
And for me, that's a lot of what writing is. It's a way of trying to like strip down all of my protective layers um and let myself be vulnerable, even though that's scary and like and it does sometimes not work and like it does hurt sometimes. I still think it's worth it. Like I think I say in the Anthropocene Reviewed book that I don't want to be cool if being cool means being cold and distant from the reality of experience. Like I want to find a way to feel what there is to feel while I'm here.
Oh, that's really nice. And you also say that you wrote this for you. You said, I wrote this for me. And how does it feel to finally be able to say that?
It's so nice. Yeah. It is the first time that I've written about myself in any kind of formal way. And and when I'm writing novels, I really am writing them for an audience that's very different from me. And I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about that time of life, being a teenager, the challenges of being a teenager. I'm not really thinking very much about my current self, my current life. And when I was writing this book, I was like, and so I did write it for myself. It's much more reflective of the way I look at the world and the way I feel than anything that I've written before. And it like we've been talking about, like it's really scary to write something that personal and to share it. Uh, but it's also been really wonderful. Like the responses to it have been so generous, and it's been an incredible experience.
And with the world, uh, what do you think is gonna happen now to us, to everyone, moving forward? What are your predictions?
I'm super bad at predicting the future. My brother always makes fun of me because I never see like technology coming. Like we started making YouTube videos before there were smartphones. And when the first like smartphones came out, Hank was like, these are going to be video cameras in the future. And I was like, no way, man. That's never going to happen. It's like people are going to make YouTube videos inside their phones. And I was like, absolutely not. That is ludicrous. So I'm not good at predicting the future. Looking at the past is one way I have of trying to understand what the future might look like. And when I look at the past and I look at past um, global crises, which I think this has been and continues to be, I think that we emerge from those experiences changed and different and thinking about the world differently. And that is often a painful process. Um, but I have to say, I see glimmers of hope in history. There is no minimizing the suffering that people are experiencing right now. And I do not think we should bright side or try to find silver linings to, this absolute horror. I hope that we will take lessons from it. I hope that we will take the lesson that all people need and deserve healthcare access, and that failing to provide access to healthcare for people is a threat to the health of everyone on the planet. And I hope that we will take forward the lesson that we are profoundly, deeply interconnected. There is no getting away from the fact that we are an international, shared global community of human beings. Political borders, viruses just don't care that much about them. Neither do carbon emissions. And we need to understand that we are one species sharing this one and only planet. And so my hope is that we will take some of those lessons away. We will understand our interconnectedness with a little more clarity, and understand both the opportunities of that interconnectedness, but also the challenges of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that honesty. I mean, that's what I really love about you. You're just so honest, and there's no silver lining stuff. I mean, it's
Not
nice.
for this, not for me anyway, not for this. But yeah, I do think, and life is like this too, like I don't like, I had a very serious, in fact, I started this book partly because I had a very serious illness, and I spent a few weeks unable to even open my eyes. And people kept trying to like tell me why it wasn't that bad, or like telling me all about the silver linings. And I was like, no, this just is really, this sucks. And like, there is no upside to it. But at the same time, on the other side of it, I can hopefully, take something from that experience and carry it forward.
Yeah, and that's what you did. You wrote about it, and now we're more aware of these the disease that happened to you, and now we learned more about that. And that's exactly what your book is all about. I mean, you share the human experience, not just of your own experience, but of the whole humanity, the Anthropocene Reviewed. Speaking of the book, and I was bragging about my signed copy, there are some other kids who got a signed copy. They were the lucky fans who joined the promo where we had the Filipino fans submit their video questions for you. And the three lucky readers each got a signed copy of the Anthropocene Reviewed. As for their questions, we are going to show them to you right now. And the first question is from Reese.
Oh, this is great.
Hey John, name's Reese, pronouns are he, they, and like a lot of people, I definitely grew up watching you on Crash Course, helping me in my exams. So I just wanted to ask, how did that experience creating content for a lot of students impact your writing? Thanks.
Oh, that's such a good question, Reese. It's had a huge impact on my writing. It never crossed my mind that I could write a nonfiction book or even a personal book until I started working on Crash Course. And it was in working on Crash Course that I realized that there's no like magic qualification that makes somebody qualified to write about history or to write about human experience. These are universal phenomena that everybody should have access to and everybody should be able to participate in. So I definitely don't think I would have written this book if it hadn't been for the experience of working on Crash Course. And also I learned a lot I've learned so much from working on Crash Course. And so a lot of what I've learned went into the book.
Okay, now the next question is from Darwin Ko.
Hi, John. Congratulations on your new book. My question is, what do you think John Green from 2005, who has just published Looking for Alaska, would say if you were to read the Anthropocene Reviewed?
It's another great question. Gosh, first off, I think John Green from 2005 would just be very happy that I am still writing and that I found a way to continue to publish and make that my job. I think John Green from 2005 would be very confused when we told him about YouTube. I think that would be, I honestly, I think he'd have a hard time getting over that. But I think I think he would like it. Like I don't know if it's helpful for other people, but sometimes I find it helpful to think back to my past selves and think like, but partly because it helps me to see the distance between my current self and my past self. So I look back at that kid and I can't help but think of him as a kid. And I think first off, like, I don't care that much what he would think because I'm very different now, and I like a lot of the changes that I've made. But I think he would be really happy and proud. I think the main thing, honestly, I think he would probably like the Anthropocene Reviewed. I hope he would. But the main thing is, I think he would be happy that I'm married to Sarah and that we have a family. Those are the things that really, really matter, and I think would have really mattered to him. But I do hope he would like the book.
Aw. And lastly, we have a question from Hannah.
Hello, Mr. Green. My name is Hannah, and I just want to ask to you, if you have a chance to name the next age after Anthropocene, what would it be and why? Well, I think that's it, and thank you so much.
Wow, these are all such good questions. Thank you, Hannah. That is such an interesting question. Wow. So first off, I really hope, humans have only been around for 250,000 years. We are a very new species. We are younger than almost any other species on Earth. Like we are very new. And I hope and I expect that we are in the Anthropocene, the age in which humans have been this, the most powerful species on the planet and a geologically significant phenomenon because of all the differences that we're making to the landscape and all the ways that we're reshaping biodiversity. That is even newer. Maybe some people say it's 500 years old. Some people say it's 200 years old. Some people say it's, maybe 10,000 years old. But on a geologic scale, all of those times are like this. They're tiny. So I hope and expect that we are in the first 1/10 of 1% of the Anthropocene, and that the age of humans will extend out for many millions of years. If I'm wrong about that, then nobody's going to get to name the next geologic age. So, but I hope that I'm right about it. And so if I could name the next geologic age, if I could dream of the next best geologic age, there was this geologic period called the Cambrian explosion, which was this huge explosion of biodiversity and lots of different kinds of life emerging all over the place in lots of different ways. And if I could dream up the next age of Earth, it would be the Cambriocene, another explosion of biodiversity, another age in which lots of different approaches to life are embraced by lots of different organisms. That sounds awesome to me.
Oh, that sounds so pretty to me.
Yeah. Plus, it would be really beautiful. It'd be cool to see it'd be cool to see different kinds of animals emerge. And so that would be my dream.
Cool. Well, thank you, John. Those were really wonderful answers. And the Anthropocene Reviewed has touched so many readers here in the Philippines. So I want to share an excerpt from one of the top reviews at Fully Booked Online. This one is from Shane Dana. The Anthropocene Reviewed will make you laugh, cringe, reminisce, and even become emotional to the point of crying. It's not a roller coaster of a read because it doesn't take off slowly, then climb, then crash, then speed up, and at the end it'll leave you with a high. I like to think of it as a museum tour, a meaningful journey through what humanity has done, achieved, and left in this world. Aww.
That's so lovely. That's wonderful. That is exactly what I dreamt it would be, like visiting a really cool museum and the journey that you go on wandering through all the different rooms. So wow, thank you.
And when I read that review, it did strike a chord with me because it was like a museum as I read the book. So good job, Shane. All right,
Yeah.
now we are going to do a fast talk portion. If it's okay with you, John, we're going to have to keep this really, really quick. Just answer these questions as soon as I ask them. All right.
Okay.
Would you rather go back to the past or access the future?
Ooh, I'd rather access the future.
You said you would be 83, God willing, when you see Halley's Comet again. How do you think you would feel when that happens?
Oh God, it would be amazing. I mean, I would feel like my life had come full circle and was complete.
Yeah, 2061, is that right?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's be there. Saab. Let's do
We're
it.
gonna be there. Okay. If the apocalypse happens, where would you rather be stuck in? A grocery store, a cabin in the woods, or a shack near the sea?
Oh, that's a great question. I would go with the shack near the sea because I'm a pretty good fisherman. So I
Oh,
feel like I'd have a chance.
that's smart. That's smart. Okay. Would you rather speak with an alien or an animal?
Oh, wow. Oh, I want to do both so badly.
Just one.
I guess an alien.
Okay. Any explanation?
I'd love to talk to somebody who evolved in a completely different way, whose experience of, I just think I'd have a lot of questions. I figure if an alien can get to us, they can answer a lot of the questions I have about the universe.
That's
So
true,
that's what I pick.
Okay. Which human historical period would you want to live in aside from the one you're living in now?
I mean, first off, let's just acknowledge that the one that I'm living in now is much better than almost all the other ones, right? Like I would in the 18th century, in the 15th century, 30,000 years ago, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have made it to 43. There's no way. So this is the moment for people like me. This is the only historical moment because no way I lived to be 43 before the last 30 years. That said, I would be completely fascinated to go back in time like 10 or 12,000 years, right at the emergence of agriculture. And just that we have so many questions that we don't have answers for about why did people start living in cities? Why did people, start making kinds of money and all this stuff that was happening 10 or 12,000 years ago? So that's where I'd go. But I
Nice.
bring some antibiotics with me because, yikes.
That's true. Okay, last question. Which person, dead or alive, would you want to have a conversation with?
Oh, I mean, it'd be cool to have a conversation with Shakespeare. It'd be cool to have a conversation with Jesus. But the answer is my grandmother. I would
Oh,
love to have one more conversation with my grandmother.
oh. So, okay, that was very, my heart. Okay. I need you to give me a quick rating of the following.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, bookmarks,
Oh, 4 stars. Sometimes I lose them, but I still find them very useful.
penalty kicks,
Oh, it's torture. 2.5 stars. It's better than the alternatives, but it's torture to watch.
eyeglasses,
5 stars. I mean, game changing.
not LASIK,
Not for me. No,
Oh,
no.
okay.
I like my glasses.
face masks,
Oh, 4.5 stars. I miss seeing people's facial expressions, but I don't miss having their respiratory droplets reach my face.
Okay, last, podcasts.
Oh, 5 stars. I love podcasts. I love the intimacy of them. I love the ways that they connect creators and listeners. I love them.
Oh yeah, I agree.
But I know
Okay.
you agree, Bob. Yeah.
And that's it. Thank you so much, John, for being with us. And to all of you folks who joined us today, Get your own copy of the Anthropocene Reviewed at Fully Booked branches and at fullybookedonline.com, and get 15% off on the export edition of the Anthropocene Reviewed from August 13 to 15 only at fullybookedonline.com. Click the link in the comments to purchase John's books. Okay, John, I hope you have a wonderful day ahead. And to everyone who's watching, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Keep on reading.